Afternoon po.
Good afternoon, Prince.
Good afternoon, Sir Aldrin. Kamusta po?
Okay naman. Kamusta?
Okay naman. Busy no? Holy Week kasi next week. Ang tayong ginagawa.
True.
Aga ko pa pala. Parang 6 pa po tayo, no?
Oo.
Sige po.
Nagre-ready pa lang kami.
Sige po, sir.
Sige lang.
Okay, sige. Thank you. Thank you, Anton. Wala si Kim, no? Parang, oo nga.
Oo, wala. Hindi siya makakapunta ngayon.
Grabe.
Oo. Sabi niya kasi, yung sa'yo daw, kayang-kaya na eh.
Ay,
3 hours na.
Dalawang oras na, ano?
Hindi, pero
Ganun,
kasi
no?
something lang kasi sa kanya, kaya hindi daw siya I'll explain naman later.
Okay. Si Sir Emer na lang yung introduce ko. Mga di meron niyang the President of the Faculty Association. Ganong introduction.
Si Sir Emer.
Sige. Grabe ka, Anton. Parang kanina nakita pa kita, may presentation ka.
Oo, medyo pagod
Grabe. Kaya nga pa.
Exams pa ng mga students.
At least, bilis lang tayo today. Nakabahan nga rin ako kasi I'm not sure if what I prepared is enough.
We'll start naman siguro kapag medyo like at least 10 or 15 na tayo.
Sige. Pahinga ka muna. Kanina ka pa nasa screen. Thank you, Anton.
Sige, Airick.
Maya na lang. Afternoon, Venus.
Hello, Airick. Good luck.
Thank you.
Okay, good evening po. Thank you all for being here. Welcome to this month's Work in Progress seminar. For this evening po, although we have posted that there are 3 presenters, unfortunately Kim cannot be with us po for some reasons of COVID-19. Let us just include him in our prayers for his speedy recovery po, if ever. So for tonight, we have Prince Airick Gapo, and the title of his presentation is What We Ought and Ought Not to Be, Rethinking the Emancipatory Role of Teachers. And we have with us Sir Emerito Gonzales with his presentation, Judith Butler's Concept of Grievability as an Extension of Axel Honneth's Theory of Recognition. So as per usual practice, for Airick's presentation, Sir Emer would moderate. And after Airick, maybe we could have like 40 minutes for his entire presentation to an hour, including questions. Sir Emer would be presenting with Airick as the moderator for him. So without further ado, Sir Emer po would be the moderator for Airick. Thank you very much.
Okay. Good evening. I hope you are healthy. Okay. Kala ko tatlo, but this shows na may casualty sa atin. Siguro naman ay panalangin natin hindi positive. And that means it's closer to home. Very, very closer to home now. Okay, so okay, let's begin. And we are blessed that Airick is here with us. So I give Airick is I think working very well on his master's work for this one. Yeah, and I've heard him in one of our classes. Okay. So ano pa ba ang alam ko kay Airick? Mamaya na sa open forum. Okay, so let's take it over, Airick, for your presentation.
Thank you for that introduction, Sir Emer, and I'm also wishing you luck in your presentation later. No, right. So thank you, Anton, and of course, friends and members of the faculty of the Philosophy Department of UST. Good afternoon. Thank you for your interest in our field of studies, and yeah, for joining us here. Hopefully, that you can help us as we progress along with our academic venture as we try to write something and contribute to the pool of knowledge. All right, so yeah, the title of my paper is actually mentioned by Anton earlier, and there are so many key terms there, but particularly what we must focus on is that the emancipatory role of teachers. What is it, no? And probably to ask that question, maybe considered a novelty or a repetitive exercise in our particular age, considering that it has been asked for so many times before by people who are more knowledgeable, by people who are more knowledgeable. But then we just cannot help ourselves but connect democracy, emancipation, and education. And since, according to Henry A. Giroux, democracy is unfinished, then there is always a need to constantly redefine and rethink the concepts of emancipatory education. Now, the second part, my working title is also about teachers. And probably that needs no explanation. That is something which is quite obvious. But then I would just like to attribute it to a line that I read in Dr. Marella Bolaños' paper in Critica, where she mentioned that it falls upon the shoulders of the teachers to revolutionize education. And probably me doing this academic effort, this venture, is probably within those lines or along those lines. So let me just show you a simple abstract that I prepared, as well as some key questions to probably guide us on what direction am I trying to head to with this paper. And I also prepared a very simple outline, and hopefully after my presentation you can help me with this one and probably try to clarify, or the thing that I'm actually looking for is to try to find the limits of this study. And because if you can just take a look, even the title itself, even the title itself is somewhat broad. But what am I focusing on? I hope that will be clarified as we progress along with my presentation. I will just be sharing my screen. So just give me a couple of seconds. I think I'll just share the entire screen because there's something wrong with my laptop. So Okay, so here we go. Is it visible from your end? Is kita po ba natin?
Yes.
Yun,
Yep,
yun.
nakikita naman.
Yes.
All
Yes,
right,
Airick.
thank you. Opo, thank you po. Thank you, Sir Emmer. And for those who responded. Anyway, once again, the working title of this paper is What We Ought to Be and Not to Be, Rethinking the Emancipatory Role of Teachers. Well, basically, I am treading the line and I'm within the bounds of critical pedagogy in the conception of this paper. And it will probably show in the abstract that I prepared. And the abstract goes like this. The study aims to examine the role of the teacher as an intellectual in accordance with the emancipatory element of education. There exists a historical nexus between emancipation and education. Considered as the orientation towards autonomy and self-realization, the emancipative character of education bestowed itself an entitled position as a driving force capable of engaging in the emancipatory process. The cogs and gears that operates the machinery of education are no other than the teachers. Considered as the most accessible of all intellectuals, teachers are at the forefront in the act of schooling society. Critical pedagogues are positing that the schools are not just instructional sites, but are places where both students and teachers make meaning. It is only by considering the schools as a social and political battleground that we can then consider education as an instrument of emancipation and bestow to the teachers the sacred duty of being emancipators. And in light of this claim, I am asking the question, what is the role of the teacher in the praxis of liberation? If education is always directive, there's always a distinct possibility that the schools and the teachers may become instruments of a pedagogy of oppression. So by examining the important works in critical pedagogy, primarily those that were written by Henry A. Giroux, establish a discourse with prevalent ideas put forth by thinkers engaged in the discussion of emancipatory education, I'm working on a redefinition of the pedagogue as an intellectual and the rethinking of the emancipatory role of teachers. For the keywords that I used for this paper, I actually picked 4: critical pedagogy, emancipation, teachers, and of course, philosophy of education. So the background of the study is quite lengthy, but hopefully it will give us a glimpse on what I am trying to write. Education and emancipation have been tied together since the onset of the Enlightenment. It has always been considered as the transitory machinery for a person to shed his self-imposed immaturity in preparation for autonomy. The role of education as a driving force of emancipation has given it the opportunity to influence society itself and not be confined in the traditional notion as a mere tool of instruction. From the perspective of critical pedagogy, for the schools to be considered an emancipative tool, they must not be treated as mere instructional sites, but rather a place for cultural and social reproduction. It is the critical pedagogue's role as a transformative intellectual to make the pedagogical more political and the political more pedagogical. That's according to Giroux. With education establishing itself as an emancipative act with the teachers as the primary actors, the next necessary question is, what then is the emancipatory role of the teacher? The modern notion of the act of emancipation is the need for an emancipator. As Judith puts it, the prevalent notion of emancipation is based on dependency. There is always a need for someone else for one to be emancipated. That emancipation is something that is to be done to somebody. Teachers then are willfully trained to assimilate the role of intellectual emancipators. But what must always be put into mind is the inherent capacity of education to be not just a tool for emancipation, but also the risk to be utilized as a weapon for indoctrination, which makes the teachers unintentional indoctrinators and hegemonic intellectuals. This claim has been apparent throughout man's encounter with the capacity of a fascist state to possess an educational apparatus. With the intellectual authority and the bestowed duty to liberate the masses, the teacher has the tendency to fall on the risk of not becoming an emancipator, but a tool for domination, by creating a sense of dependency among those whom he or she strive to be liberated, and by discounting the idea that the oppressed is capable of self-emancipation. So basically, the the important, probably the important concepts that I would like to raise in my background of the study is that emancipation is something, is something that is brought from the outside, and probably that is something that I will use to question the promise of critical pedagogy. And to shed more light into that, let us just look at the key questions that I formulated, to be followed by a brief, siguro I think it's brief, by a brief intro, by a brief paper outline that I prepared. So yeah, let's continue forward. So the key questions that I formulated for this paper. The first one is, what is the emancipatory role of the teacher? The second one is, what is the possibility of describing an emancipatory education that is free from resorting to educational liberators who are tasked to reveal the world to the oppressed? And finally, what is the nature of authority in the emancipatory project of education? I'm still working on the key questions actually, and I'm still thinking of if these are worthy to become the statement of, or to problematize this and become the statement of a problem of the paper that I will be writing in the future. But for the paper outline, yeah, for the first part, I will actually be focusing on the works of Paulo Freire. Paulo Freire, the Brazilian critical pedagogue, and I entitled it "Critical Pedagogy and Education as the Practice of Freedom." There are a lot of explanations there, but let us just probably focus on the last part so that we can save time. No, here on this one. On this opening part of the paper, I will explore some of the most influential works of Paulo Freire that laid the foundation for critical pedagogy as a viable alternative to the traditional conduct of schooling. I will be focusing on the pedagogy of the oppressed and its focus on the struggle for liberation, the emancipatory quality of problem-posing education, and the empowering quality of dialogue. The rationale behind the discussion of Freire rests on the fact that the works of Freire carry an immeasurable influence on the works of Henry A. Giroux, a contemporary of Freire, who is instrumental in associating critical pedagogy with critical theory, exploring the concept of the hidden curriculum as a tool for dominance, and is credited, some are crediting Henry A. Giroux for the name of the movement itself for critical pedagogy. So, the second part of the paper is probably this considered as the introduction to the meat, or to the central concept of the paper itself. It's an introduction to the works of Henry A. Giroux, The Hidden Curriculum and Resistance in Education. He is credited as the one who initiated the movement of critical pedagogy in North America. Giroux expanded the discussion on critical pedagogy by further strengthening its philosophical foundation and reinforcing the necessary translation of theory into practice. It was made possible by the exploration of Giroux of the politics of schooling, the hidden curriculum, the distribution of knowledge, and the intellectualization of teachers. So I'll begin my discussion through an exposition of Giroux's grounding of critical pedagogy with the Frankfurt School's notion of theory, which he discussed in the opening chapters of his landmark work, Theory and Resistance in Education Towards a Pedagogy for the Opposition. And after that, I'll be proceeding by the exploration on Giroux's notion on the hidden curriculum and its implications in schooling as a political and cultural site, particularly its influence on the impossibility of the consideration of schools as a neutral site. For Giroux, an education that clings to neutrality is an education that lacks accountability. To put it simply, I will be proceeding with a discussion on Giroux's hidden curriculum with the question, is it possible for schools to remain neutral? The necessity of such is a view that schooling has now turned into an expensive form of police. It was stated in his Theory and Resistance in Education, and the need to address the state of helplessness of non-neutrality, which was actually attributed to Maclaren, another contemporary of Henry Giroux, instilled in all institutions of education. From this, I will proceed in laying the groundwork for the discussion on the role of the teachers as transformative intellectuals and their responsibilities as emancipators, in accordance with the tenets of critical pedagogy raised by Giroux in his works, Teachers as Intellectuals, On Critical Pedagogy, and Schooling in the Struggle for Public Life. The next chapter for me is probably the the central, not the central, the most important point of the paper itself. No? And probably it might expand, or it might probably be more within the focus on a particular context. But let's find out later no, as we go along with the open forum. But for now, let me just discuss this third part of the paper, the emancipatory role of teachers. Freire states that schools can never claim a neutral stance for education. And education has always been and always will be a political act, which makes the teacher a politician. This puts the teacher in a position of non-neutrality, as opposed with the traditional concept that education must retain its neutral stand, being the representative of all social factions. Freire claims that education is naturally directive. Although Freire is positing that all men and women are intellectuals, regardless of social and political functions, it still clings to the idea that structures are essential. The critical educator must not abandon structure, direction, and norms. And as Dr. Franz Cortez, I think this is included in his dissertation of the University of Santo Tomas, puts it, one can have authority without being authoritarian. It is this stand of critical pedagogy that I would put into question, for it enhances the modern notion of emancipation, stated in the background of this study, that there is a need for someone else to fuel the emancipatory process. Will it be possible for the critical educator to abandon form, structure, and most importantly, authority, to reduce or, if possible, eliminate the risk of dependency among the to be emancipated? By asking this question, I am initiating a rethinking of the emancipatory role of teachers, which will hopefully lead to a redefinition of the stated as to not fall from the pitfalls of history and passing its steps. When I was formulating this one, it is as if I am treading on the line, or probably walking on the avenue that Ivan Illich took when he wrote Deschooling Society and Anarchism in Education. But the point here, I think the point that I am trying to make here is that it's not the actual, no? It's not the actual disfigurement or the actual removal of authority, or just the need to develop, no? The need to develop a concept of authority constructed to serve the interest of emancipatory pedagogy. Yeah, I think that is the point that I am trying to make, or the direction that I will be taking as I go along with this paper. To continue, at this part of the paper, I am probably exploring some of the views of other philosophers or other thinkers regarding emancipatory education. But for the first part, I am focusing actually on the hidden curriculum and, of course, the authority of teachers to formulate curriculums, no? To formulate different curricula, and how it is a curriculum within a curriculum, the hidden curriculum in curriculum making. And by doing that, I formulated this one. Primitive education, according to the Spanish philosopher Jose Ortega, in his work Mission of the University, is an inverted form of modern education because it is primarily an act of concealing. That puts the concept of modern education as an act of revealing. The question on what is and what should be revealed leads to the idea of the economization of education. There is so much to be known and to be revealed in a limited academic time frame that educators are left with the task to choose what should be taught. Hence, the birth of the teacher as a curricularist. The traditionalist puts the burden of choosing what should be taught on the shoulder of the teacher alone, assigning them the responsibility of developing a structure that serves as a roadmap on what should be learned. The critical pedagogue involves the learners in the aforementioned process in lieu of the belief that the latter must practice his or her self-determination en route to being emancipated. Yet, all curricula are necessarily and naturally structured, and upon this structure lies the influence of the teacher. To provide an autocritique on the emancipatory role of the teacher, I'll be exploring the idea that there is a hidden curriculum in every curriculum, may it be explicit, implicit, or null. Now, that's the categorization that Eisner proposed. And the teacher's state of helplessness in intervening, persuading, and that even in some cases, there's coercion. Aside from that, in this particular chapter, also be opening probably a brief discussion just to add to the voices. Probably not as a polemic, no, but just to add to the voices in the discussion regarding emancipatory education. From on this part, I am actually taking in the philosophy of education, no, as proposed by Jackson here. There are definitions of the role of the educator in the discourse of emancipatory education under the umbrella of philosophy of education. A notable contribution is the emancipatory role of the schoolmaster proposed by Jacques Rancière in his work The Ignorant Schoolmaster. Rancière posits that people are of equal intelligence. The educator must position himself at a distance as not to weaken the individual will of the student, the will of the political subject, and the position of ignorance of the teacher, born out from the presupposition that all intelligences are equal, provides an opportunity to think about what can be done with the supposition of the equality of intelligence and how it will redefine the role of the teacher in the emancipatory process. This ultimately questions the relevance of authority in education and the emancipatory process itself. Can the teacher and the student share the same language of emancipation if there is a difference in positionality and the hovering presence of authority that the critical pedagogy clings onto so tightly? If all education in its broadest sense is a practice of freedom, where does the authority of the teacher lies in the spectrum of emancipation? On this particular part, I'm actually thinking, probably some of you are thinking right now, am I trying to confront critical pedagogy with Rancière? I think in one article that I've read, no, it was written by Sarah Galloway. No, she said there that actually Rancière and Freire, they actually share the same questions, and probably by exploring a bit of Rancière, I can have a clearer view on the questions or on the answers that I'm trying to look for as I try to question the notion of authority and the place of the teacher in the emancipatory process of education. And finally, at the last part, sorry if it's quite long, no? But the last part, well, this probably is a synthesis of everything that I have discussed from the beginning of the paper. I entitled it as What We Ought to Be and Not to Be. No, what we ought not to be. The final part will offer a presentation of the conglomeration of ideas raised by the paper from the perspective of critical pedagogy and alternative positions regarding the emancipatory role of teachers. The section will also include the discussion on the possibility of converting the rethinking into praxis through considering the facticity of teachers in a current system that blatantly treats the former as a high-level technician who carry out dictations and transference of knowledge on what Henry Giroux refers to as the proletarianization of teachers. I'll be engaging on the inquiry of critical pedagogy's concept on autocritique and how it can safeguard the teacher to not be led astray in the process of emancipation and promote the dominating nature of an alienated intellectualism. I will try to redefine the limits of the emancipatory role of education in the process, clarify the promise of critical pedagogy. Freire did not fail to discuss the limits of the transformative capability of liberating pedagogy and how it can be a tool for the preparation for social transformation. But it does not mean that it can, only in itself, education, change society. But the common notion that is held is the idea that the school is the primary force in the project of changing society. The appalling challenges of our era have shown that even if it can be said that the contemporary world is more educated than previous generations, the quality of our democracy is regressing. Systems succumb to the depoliticization of education to give way to training students for the world economy. The emancipatory role of teachers has become more significant and should be further scrutinized not just from external forces, but also from within. The recognition of the idea that the students are capable of emancipating themselves should put into question the traditional notion of the teacher's role in emancipation, all in an effort to ensure the respect of the autonomy of the learner. So yeah, just some final lines regarding this presentation. I think it was in an interview when I heard Henry Giroux mention that the heart of any pedagogical practice is empowerment. No, is empowerment. But what I'm actually positing here is that I am actually trying to question that with the existence of authority, with the systems of structure and the practice of imposing on what should be learned and what should be taught. So basically, that is that those are the questions, and those are the questions that are actually bothering me right now. And I hopefully will try to find the answer through this paper, and of course through your help. So thank you so much for listening. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you very much, Airick,
Yeah.
for that. As tama yung hula ko talagang academic paper na talaga yung na-compose ni Airick. Ready to be approved and maybe certified as good. All right. Yes, thank you, Airick, for reminding us about Giro and Franzier and Airick. I admit I only know some things about Airick, but not the two others. All right. Okay. Sige. If you are asking any question or contributing any to Airick, please just open your microphone or raise your hand, and we'll give you the floor. Kailan ba tayo ngayon? 27 tayo. Ang dami.
If I may po,
Yes, Neji, Sam, okay, please go ahead.
yeah, thank you, Sir Emer. Good evening, Airick, and to all. Airick is my classmate also in graduate school in Rancher. Now, so mauna na lang ako because my comment is very very light. No? So mauna na ako. So I'd like to thank Airick now for your presentation. I just have a parang concern regarding how you cite, no? Very minor talaga yung ano ko. But I want you to look into this, check into this, no? Because I think when you cite the parenthetical citation is not outside of the sentence, no? I think it must be inside the sentence. So mahuhuli dapat yung period, no? So I saw that earlier, Sky, when you cited Sir Franz, no? So just have to check the proper citation. No? That's my first comment on the format. No? My second comment, I see that you have included many philosophers, no? And I understand that maybe it was Henry Giroux that is your primary source. Correct me if I'm wrong. Is Henry Giroux your primary source?
Yes, Negi, I'll be using Giroux's critical pedagogy for this paper.
And what about the others? Are they secondary sources?
Yes, most of them are, and actually, I'll be having a discussion on Freire, no? And probably you might be asking, pero yeah, probably might be asking why Henry Giroux, because there are so many contemporaries of Freire who are also very reputable in critical pedagogy. We have Ira Shore, we have Aranowitz and Donald Macedo. I chose Henry Giroux because. No, I'm actually not trying to discredit my background in teacher education. We were also taught about emancipation, about our role in emancipation, in creating a democratic, a truly democratic society. But I think what we lack back then in my background as a student of teacher education, what we lack there is a particular language. Is a particular language to probably express the thought in a more in a more concrete manner, and that language was provided to me by Henry Giroux, by Henry Giroux. But Freire is also great, and that's why I also included him, especially in the introductory part. So yun lang, share ko lang. Sorry, Negi.
Yes. Thank you for expressing your reason for of interest, no? But actually, my main concern there is that I seem to find your parang background of the study lacking some secondary sources of the contemporary scholars, no? Although parang you made mention of the parang main figures, pero I think kulang sa secondary sources of the contemporary scholars who have dealt with this research, no? So, yun lang naman. I think, yeah, yun lang. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Naji. Okay, yes, Airick, for your comments.
Yeah, thank you so much, Negi. I just put into consideration that this is the first, that this is the first work in progress, and there will be another one. If it will be approved, no, there will be another one on May, where it will be more concise, no, where it will be more specific. Yeah, but thank you for reminding me about the citation as well as the secondary sources. No? So thank you so much, Negi. Sir Emmer, please. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Naji. Yes, thank you. Yeah. Anyone else? Yes, Doc Joby. Doc Joby, you have the floor.
Okay, salamat po. Magandang gabi sa lahat. Magandang gabi, Airick. Airick, nadidinig mo ba ako?
Apo, magandang gabi po, Doc Joby. Kumusta po?
Mabuti naman. Ano lang ang sa akin, una, I just want to know if are you doing this paper as a possible thesis material or this is a requirement of one of your courses?
I haven't taken thesis writing one yet. I'm planning to take it next semester, and yeah, I'm actually thinking of the possibility of using this one as for my thesis po, if it will be approved or yeah. Thank you po.
Ang itatanong ko ay, although based on what you presented, mukhang namang you have much to say about the emancipatory function of education, and you provided enough theoretical grounding for pushing such. Ang bitin sa akin sa papel, the way it stands now, I'm not sure if you articulate enough or you present enough. Yung bang discussion about what should we, let me put it this way, what should we emancipate ourselves or the students from? Kasi parang right away in your presentation, sige, push natin yung emancipation, that education and teachers for that matter have emancipatory functions. Pero para bang yung paper is taking for granted the so-called pathologies of emancipation. Tinatanong ko to dahil siguro in previous generations, madaling makita yung opposite ng emancipation. Emancipation versus slavery, for example. Emancipation versus economic inequality. Emancipation versus unfair distribution of socioeconomic goods, or emancipation versus lack of access or lack of fair access to education. Ngayon, parang I'm not sure if I'm the one who shared this perspective. Yung bang borderline between emancipation and its opposite is no longer that clear. So much so na yung mga taong gusto sana nating i-emancipate ayaw nilang ma-emancipate kasi they have fallen in love with their own, I don't know, oppressed situation, things like that. I'm not sure if in the entirety of the paper or in its full-blown version, you will devote a discussion on ano ba yung current pathologies sa society or within the academe that make the work for emancipation an urgent thing. Just to be concrete about what I'm saying, I'm sure familiar ka sa DDS phenomenon. Diba? Sige, subukan mo magsalita doon ng emancipation na you will teach them to get themselves emancipated. Tingnan natin kung may makikinig sa'yo. That is my point yung parang the alternative to hindi alternative yung what makes emancipation necessary is not as clear as before. Sa tingin ko, if you are going to pursue this, hindi lang bilang isang researcher, kundi bilang advocate ng emancipatory education, siguro kasama rin yung paglilinaw natin, hindi lang doon sa theoretical component of emancipatory education, kundi, like I said, the conditions that make it necessary, the conditions that make it urgent. Yun lang, Airick.
Thank you, Sir Doc Jovi. Thank you, Doc Jovi, for that. Now that actually makes much sense and it actually hit right home, no? Kasi yeah, medyo na ano rin ako kasi yeah, I'm actually establishing the connection between theory and praxis, and then again I forgot to mention that, but hopefully along the way, no? Kasi yeah, just a comment on what Doc Jovi told us. No, parang, I think it was Henry A. Giroux who mentioned that no one is born oppressed. No one is born oppressed, and no one is born an oppressor. But we are educated into being oppressors and into being oppressed. No, and that is what I mentioned earlier. No, when we talk about the fascist, no, the fascist having an educational apparatus, no, the fascistization, no, the fascistization of education, and it is apparent. No, I think what Doc Jovi mentioned, no, as an example, no, the DDS, no, the DDS phenomenon, they were not born that way. No, they are educated. They're educated that way. No, and yeah, there's so much to talk about it. But I will put into mind. No, I will specifically focus on trying to make that more explicit. And thank you for pointing that out, Doc Jovi. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Jovi, if there is follow-up.
No more, Sir Emer.
Yeah, okay. Thank you. All right. Yeah. That gives us time. That gives Airick time to ponder and digest. Yeah, thank you.
Sorry, Doc Pao is raising his hand.
Doc Pao, yeah.
And also,
Hello.
Yes, Doc Pao.
Hello, thank you, Sir Emer. Hello, Airick. Kumusta?
Okay lang, Doc. Good evening po. Kamusta po kayo?
Yeah. Okay lang naman. I just like to follow up on what Doc Jovi already mentioned about your paper. I think what he's trying to say, and I think you already understood what he was trying to point out. The specific, I think he's referring to the specificity of your critique. What is it exactly that you are criticizing? Using Giroux, of course. But I think alam mo yung sagot dito sa tanong kung ano yung gusto mong i-criticize, no? I think you have the answer. And it's just a matter of, as you said, being more specific or being more explicit. Just a matter of, I would like to put that in another way. It's just a matter of, you also mentioned it in your talk, or you mentioned it earlier, yung language, no? The proper language to articulate um, articulate the problem and also to articulate your critique. Ang nasa isip ko hindi ka naman kailangan lumayo dahil ang criticize mo yung kultura ng pagtuturo, the culture of teaching in the Philippines. Specifically, I think the Philippines, no? Which, if I understood your presentation correctly, what you find in the culture of teaching in the Philippines is its lack of, you use the word language, but lack of critical proclivity, perhaps. There's so much emphasis on method of teaching, too much emphasis on following policy and so on. But the problem is that teachers are not made to think about their situation. Yun rin ang sinasabi ni Doc Jovi kanina, no? The possibility, what are the social ontological conditions that that result in pathologies in teaching. And then and then of course part of your critique, I think, is that teachers are not trained to question their situation. Parang ganun ang sa tingin ko ang sinasabi mo. You're not trained to look at you're not trained to look at your situation from a critical standpoint. Kaya ang nangyari, it seems like the topic of even the possibility of questioning the situation becomes taboo. Kasi it seems like I don't know how to express it exactly, pero parang not only is the focus more on method and policy and so on, it seems like in the course of teacher training, parang nabubuo yung kultura of silence, no? The culture of silence is in a way subtly being I don't know how to put it, adapted, no? So yun, so tingin ko medyo mahaba na yung yung comment ko, pero hindi ka naman kailangan lumayo dahil yung critique mo, I think, is within your own field, no? Yun ang gusto mo i-criticize. Sige, yun na lang muna, and then kung meron pa akong i-suggest mamaya.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Pao.
Yeah,
Yes, Airick.
just a response to Doc Pao. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Doc Pao. Yeah, I agree. No, I think it was in Dr. Marela Bolaños' class in P4C when we talked about the that particular, that distinct feature of research in education of focusing on methodologies, on pedagogy itself, but it lacks that particular quality. The Dr. Franz Cortez referred to it as a autocritique. I think Doc Pao mentioned the authentic reflexivity in one of his talks, no? And in P4C circles, they call it as a reflective practice. And there is something that is sorely that is sorely lacking in teacher training, in teacher education here in our country. And it is what Henry A. Giroux mentions as a part of the hidden curriculum. No, they are trained that in that particular way without being stated, without stating it, no, without even stating it. And even that culture of silence is part of that hidden curriculum that is very prevalent. That is prevalent not just in teacher education, but in the totality of education itself. So yeah, thank you, Doc Pao. Yeah, and yung pong nasabi niyo po na yung social ontological conditions, yes, I will look into that po. Thank you, Doc Pao.
Okay, thank you, Airick. Yes, we are open for last question on this first segment. Who will be the lucky winner for that slot?
Sir Emer, si Sir PJ po, nagtataas po ng
PJ, yeah, PJ. Okay, please go ahead, PJ.
Hi, good evening, Airick. First of all, I want to congratulate you and kamusta rin. It's also nice to be back in the loop of these discussions, and I happen to hear your discussion. It's I find it very interesting. It's something that I also could relate to. But in the discussion, I just want to somehow pick up from the comment of Dr. Carina. I think that's something that I also saw during the presentation with regard to the clarity of what are we hinting at specifically. I think the way that I actually framed my comments is how do we define the critical impulse among academicians and demarcate it from uncritical ones. And you also mentioned something that you, of course, want to look at it and how theory is actually fused in practice and how you intend to localize it in our Philippine context. I think there's also one possible video that you could actually look at is the way history is being taught in certain educational institutions, where in some cases what is taught is leaning towards revisionism. So in that context, how do you define now what is critical? Because even those who have certain radical ideas leaning towards the right would claim that their language and what they're talking about is critical. Same with the ones in the opposite pole. So among academicians, going back to the question what we ought to be and not to be, how do we resolve this one? And another part, I guess, is I find the discussion in terms of the Giroux context, but perhaps you could also somehow differentiate how Freire is different from the context of Giroux. Especially Giroux is actually revolving around realities of education under neoliberalism. So I guess it's really about what particular epistemic problem in education the paper wishes to address. I think that's how I gathered the points from your discussion. Thank you, Airick, and good luck. Mabuhay ka.
Yes, yeah, thank you, PJ. Yeah, Airick, last words on PJ or?
Right. So just to thank you, Sir Emer. Just to respond to Sir PJ, it's been a while now. I think the last time we've been with each other virtually was in the Luziata or in Post-Truth. But yeah, to respond to your your comments. So the first one is about how history is being taught. Now, that's actually very Jerome. That's actually very Jerome. His critique actually expands into culture and history, and the difference between Jerome and Freire. From my early readings, now of both critical pedagogues, Freire is somewhat leaning towards Heidegger, Sartre, and of course, there's so much of Fromm and Buber in his works. But the thing about Giroux is that he's actually anchoring his critical pedagogy more on critical theory, the Frankfurt School's notion of theory. He's so fond of Gramsci. He's so fond of Gramsci as well as Horkheimer and Adorno. That's why I have to brush up on my readings on critical pedagogy. But yeah, thank you so much, and yeah, all of those comments now from Sir PJ, from Doc Pao, Doc Jovi, and Neki. Yeah, I think that will ultimately help me as I try to give form and shape my paper into something which is more academically. I know Doc Pao hates the word academically aligned, alignment, or aligned. Yeah, thank you so much for your comments. Thank you so much for listening also.
Okay, thank you, Airick. Thank you. Good luck, Airick. Good luck. Okay, at this point in time, I have to turn over the moderating to Kim. Is Kim there already? And then I turn on presenting my slides. Kaya, Kim?
Good evening po, Sir Emer.
Yeah, okay. Thank you.
I'll be the session's moderator. I am Kim. And good evening once again po to our professors and our guests here. Especially to our next presenter, Sir Emer, who will be presenting his paper with the title Judith Butler's Concept of Grievability as an Extension of Axel Honneth's Theory of Recognition. So without further ado, Sir Emer, you may have the floor. Thank you.
Oh, yes. Okay. Thank you. Yeah. Before I... All right. Okay. Okay. Now, before I start, is my audio clear? Kim?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Yeah. Before I start, I'd like to sincerely thank the department for the support. And it's been a long while na I haven't talked to a chance like this. But, anyway, sana ba? Okay. Yeah. Can you see my screen now?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Now, again, honestly, this is a, how shall I say it? Like what our dear colleague Gian said before, it is really a work in progress in comparison to what Airick has presented. Yes, if meaning means sense, and sense means direction, then this presentation today, maybe a 5 or 7 minute presentation, is just presenting or showing the direction where it may lead. Now, I don't know if I am taking too much that I may not be able to chew or swallow and digest, but I also don't know if there is some promise of it at the end of the tunnel for me on this work. And I acknowledge the consultation I had with Dr. Bolaños, Dr. Pada, and even to some extent to Dr. Carino, and of course to Dr. Bobby Montaña. Okay. My tentative title would be Judith Butler's Concept of Grievability as an Extension of Axel Honneth's Theory of Recognition. I admit now here that this is only reflective of one half of what I plan to do. Maybe it could just be a title for an article, but not yet for the whole dissertation plan. Okay. This philosophical study is a review of the concepts of dignity and human rights as implied in the thoughts of Immanuel Kant, George Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel, Axel Honneth, and Judith Butler. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights relies significantly on a very Kantian formulation of dignity and basic rights. Hegel, however, found this Kantian perspective to be insufficient. And then from there, of course, in the tradition of the critical philosophy, Axel Honneth, through his theory of recognition, extended this critique by expounding on his views on love, respect, and esteem. Following and improving on this approach, Judith Butler added the concept of grievability to make the idea of dignity concrete and more urgent. I encountered this in that online class with Dr. Bolaños. Okay, and I found it, and I found it very, a way na very, very concreto yung pananaw ni Butler on the concept of dignity as compared to that of Immanuel Kant. In Butler's advancement of nonviolence, human dignity is more than just a given. It is something that all persons work out to attain and maintain it. It is a collective effort through the interconnectedness of all persons. An exposition on the Universal Declaration of Human Rights will serve as an introduction to the study. There will be four main parts of this research, namely, 1. The Kantian application of dignity and basic rights. 2. Hegel's critique of that Kantian position on dignity. Bakit nakulangan si Hegel? Ano yung mga sinuggest ni Hegel? And then number 3, Honneth's interpretation of dignity in the practices of recognition, love, respect, and esteem. At this point, I have to be honest that I am not so sure. I maybe am treading on what we call it unfamiliar terrain when it comes to Honneth. And number 4, Butler's ideas of nonviolence and grievability as concrete manifestations of human dignity. There, I admit that I can be more comfortable with Butler, and I find Butler to be the most practical among all of the 4 philosophers that I mentioned. Now, I came up with sketches on how to triangulate or to relate the concepts. Now, if we start from the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which is, of course, paid lip service by many countries. For example, our very own Duterte. Now, wherein we base our concrete views and practices of human dignity and human rights. Now, on that point, yes, I have mentioned a while ago that we cannot take out totally St. Thomas Aquinas because it's obvious on Immanuel Kant that, yes, Kant was under the influence of St. Thomas Aquinas on the concept of law, society, etc. And Kant was expounding on dignity and rights. Para bang ini-extend niya yung idea ni Thomas Aquinas. On the other end, to your right, yes, we can say that Axel Honneth's recognition reflects and reiterates human dignity and human rights. Now, I did not want to complicate the matter. However, I find relevance on the readings or the writings of Judith Butler, especially the concept of grievability and nonviolence. That's why if I were, I am into the exploratory stage of it. And I got naman the nod of our co-faculty members on this, that maybe this is the contribution of this dissertation plan to connect it to the concept of grievability and nonviolence of Butler. as a new way of appreciating the concept of dignity and rights. Now, the digging areas, yeah, I still remember what the doctors have mentioned to me is that there will have to be a, what do you call it, prerequisite initiation or parang ganon na matinding digging that will happen, that has to happen. And yes, I haven't started yet, but I am moving towards getting the inspiration to go back and dig on the practical reason, critique of practical reason of Kant, the critique of pure reason, and maybe even the metaphysics of morals. On Hegel, which is the necessary spade work, like what Dr. was mentioned, I need to dwell on the phenomenology of spirit, maybe the philosophy of right, and the general writing. On Honneth, yes, the three big books, okay, The Struggle for Recognition, The Critical Theory of Axel Honneth by Daniel Peterbridge, then Axel Honneth's Social Philosophy of Recognition by our very own Professor Dr. R.T. Pada. On Judith Butler, I have only read, okay, The Force of Nonviolence, and have watched some lectures of Judith Butler on video via YouTube. And the other one that really interests me would be the reading of The Precarious Life, The Powers of Mourning and Violence. Now, yes, in ending, yes, I'm making the appeal also that in case you have article or essay or scan books or no any link to online sources which are related to my topic, yes, I am very much open and thankful that for any help that you could extend. You can message me some messenger or maybe email them to me. Okay, to that one. So up to this, thank you very much, dear fellow lovers of philosophy. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Sir Emmer,
Yep.
for presenting your work in progress. The floor is now open for those who would want to ask regarding his paper. Thank you. Yes po, Doc Pau.
Hello, Sir Emmer, hello.
Hi, Doctor.
Kumusta?
Good question.
Yeah, um, yeah, thank you for, first, before I go to your paper, uh, teka lang, magpapalit lang ako ng earphone. Hello?
Yes, Doc.
Yeah. Now before, I'd like to congratulate you first, no, for for being the new USFU president, no. It's a new chapter for USFU and for UST faculty, no, a bright future. Um, Notwithstanding, of course, the issues. And then there's one that's cropping up. But anyway, no, thank you. Yeah, thank you for presenting your plan for your dissertation. I'm glad. I think I mentioned it before that I'm glad that you are willing to explore new territory, in particular critical theory, specifically Honneth and Judith Butler. At the same time, exploring Kant and Hegel. Of course, we already had a long conversation about this before. Um, but of course, we'd like to solicit the views of our colleagues. Now, yeah, I think I was the one who said that there's a little bit of digging that should happen, relating. I think yung Universal Declaration of Human Rights is a good starting point. It's an excellent starting point for um, uh, discoursing on or starting a discourse on human rights, precisely because it's a
Yeah.
Universal Declaration of Human Rights. But I think you need to do there, which I think we talked about before, is to um, un- unpack or uncover the philosophical foundations of the declaration. And
Yeah.
here we identify its Kantian, uh, tag dito, foundation. It might not be explicit. No, the writers might not be explicit about it.
Yeah.
Those who composed the Universal Declaration. But we also have to understand that they wrote the Universal Declaration against the backdrop of their tradition, no? Their understanding of human rights. And Kant played a very important role in honing that, you know, uh, as a matter of fact, Western view
Yeah.
of rights, of human rights. And of course, here comes Hegel. Um, we identified the specific, the basic materials that perhaps you need to go through. But like I mentioned before, these are just starting points, and as you read, there will be further ramifications and branching out. No,
Mm.
um, but I think that's the first thing that you need to do, to establish or to unpack rather the philosophical foundations of the idea of human rights. Doesn't matter if you go back to Aquinas or further back to the ancient Greeks, as long as you are able to present a kind of intellectual history of the idea, because
Mm.
only by presenting an intellectual history of the idea of human rights are you able to identify what's lacking in
Yeah.
uh, in its present form. Uh, and I think if I understand correctly what you're trying to point out, it seems like the declaration itself is a little bit too abstract,
Yeah.
and it doesn't have it does not yes, indeed, it is based on concrete historical situations, but it, the text itself is a little too abstract. So philosophically, then how we would make more sense of the Universal Declaration, or not necessarily the Universal Declaration, or rather the idea of human rights. How do
Yeah.
we make sense of the idea of human rights in concrete terms? Um, uh, how do we present it ontologically, right? How does it happen, or how is it possible? Because that's how I understand ontology. Ontology has something to do with conditions that make other conditions possible, um, or conditions that make an event possible. Or but in this context, what makes human rights possible, or what are the conditions that um, forces us or allow force conditions that force us or allow us to think about human rights, or to even discourse on human rights. um, And then, of course, Honneth provides us with a more or less, uh, I would say concrete to some extent, but not as concrete as we would like it to be. And I think, and I agree with you that uh, Judith Butler provides perhaps a remedy not only to Honneth, but also to to the abstract idea of human rights. Basically, in my interpretation of the force of nonviolence, uh, uh, is is that she's basically talking about an idea, if not similar to the idea of human rights, she is actually talking about human rights.
Yes.
That is my interpretation. But we both agree that she provides a very concrete ontological description of the possibility of recognizing the rights of the other person. No? So, kay Honneth kasi, although we gather from Honneth the theory of recognition, um, it's not as it's still a little abstract, no? Pero and the ontology is not Honneth's ontology is not as refined, I think, compared to Butler's ontology of grievability.
Yeah.
Why do we? Kasi the question I think is why should we take care of other people, or why should we to use Honneth's term? Why should we recognize other people?
Yeah.
Um, uh, the answer of uh, um, Butler, to my mind, is more straightforward and more concrete because she said that people, even if we don't know them, are grievable. Um, and then, so that's my. I think that it's a very promising project. It will take a lot of reading and a lot of work and a lot of writing, but sayang kasi if you're not going to pursue it, because it's a very um, yeah, promising and practical later on, since you're the new USFU president. uh, I think by pursuing this project, you will have, I believe, the philosophical, fuel to
Yeah.
to do your job uh, as the USFU president. But yung may tanong sana ako dun sa extension.
Yeah.
Third extension in your title. Um, I cannot think of an alternative word for it. Pero anyway, it's a working title.
Yeah.
So it will change in due course. So I'm not going to dwell on that at the moment. But I'd like to suggest, because you mentioned a few, I call this materials by Honneth. One material by Honneth, the struggle for recognition, and a couple of I call this a couple of secondary material. Um, I would suggest, however, that since kasi what you find in the struggle for recognition is a kind of on the one hand, it's a kind of philosophical anthropology, meaning in the struggle for recognition, you find Honneth's theory of the human person. Basically, he is answering at least this is how I understand it. He is answering the question, what is a person?
Yes.
Uh, And he answers that by going back to Hegel, and he ramifies Hegel by talking about the three spheres of recognition.
Yes.
But that's basically a philosophic. For me, it's a philosophical anthropology. It answers the question, what is a person? Secondarily, although of course that's the basis. It's not the idea of recognition, of course, and the idea of mutual recognition, more specifically, and let's say human rights. No, it's not really secondary, but it presupposes that discourse on philosophical anthropology. And so that's something that you want to reconstruct. The second thing about Honneth is, since you're going to talk about human rights, I think in relation to democracy later on, or human rights in relation to some sort of political or social philosophy. I think in addition to the struggle for recognition, it's important that you. By the way, he also has a book called Disrespect. No?
Disrespect.
Disrespect, the normative foundations of critical theory. So it's, if you think about it, it's gearing towards that already. The
Okay.
idea of mutual respect, the idea of uh, mutual recognition. But since you are talking about human rights, you might as well also read one of his more recent works. The title is Freedom's Right,
Freedom fighter, right?
which was published in 2014. Freedom's Right is where he, I call this, he basically provides his interpretation of Hegel's philosophy of right. But to me, that is a more, not only is it a direct, a more or less direct engagement with Hegel, I think it's a more there you will find a more nuanced discussion of human rights.
Yes.
So that's Freedom's Right. Siguro yun na lang muna. I don't want to complicate your reading. And I don't want to contribute to the piling up of readings. Although whether we like it or not, mangyayari at mangyayari yon eventually.
Right.
But hopefully you'd be able to finish your dissertation, which I think is very promising.
Yeah. Thank you. Wow.
Thank you,
Wow.
Dr. Pao.
Right. Yeah. Actually, it is thanks to some of our colleagues in the philosophy department, to JB Ignacio, si Rene Tadle, Bobby Montaña, Aldous Bacay, even Flor, okay, of course, that supported me. Of course, I know all of the department did support us into that democratic process, and but those persons are really worth mentioning for their above average contribution. I think dito sabi ko I can present in the week because it's the time for me that I can not be demanded of something. Kasi alam ko I really am ang ano pala para ka palang on call. On call palagi, kailangan mo sumagot, kailangan mong kausapin, at siyempre pati yung best friend natin na ayoko sanang makausap at ayoko ay naiwasan kung ano dahil nga alam nyo naman ang history natin sa kanya, sa ating best friend, sa ating trabaho, wala akong choice kundi makipagplastikan sometimes. And yes, I thought kanina that if I go back and dig on this the more, it is like my pastime and it's a hobby that I love better than the work. as a union president. And these people make it easier for me in the union. JP, Rene, Bobby before, okay, Aldous, okay, who are also part of our department. And yeah, I'm looking forward to the Holy Week and maybe 1 week, 10 days of break that I can dig deeper into these suggestions that you're given. Thank you, Gapo.
Yeah, you're welcome. And apologies for sending you that text message at 4 a.m.
Oh, it's okay. Awake na nga ako eh. That's why I sometimes I get to wake up at that time. Oh, thank you. It is being addressed to that point because some of us are faculty members right here and the updates will come out. Actually, at 8 p.m. tonight, I have a meeting with the Dole Undersecretary, which was brokered by no less than our own Rene Tadle. Okay, for clarification onto that. So, yeah. Suddenly, after a week, bakuna, naging bakuna zar ako para sa UST. Kumbaga, and,
But if we relate that to your theoretical work, I think it makes sense that you're working on
yes,
recognition and
Yes.
the ontology of grievability, no? Kasi
yes.
it provides a kind of concrete,
Context.
a kind of, let's say, a concretization of the theory, no?
Yes.
Which, yeah, no, it makes sense.
Yes.
That we should. It makes sense that you continue as the USPO president.
Oo nga. I get your point, Pao. It's like, bakit sila yung nag-decide na grievable yung iba hindi?
Well, yeah. Of course, we have most people here are not privy to our
Politics.
politics, pero of course there will be limitations or restrictions. Pero yung mga para sa akin, pinagdadamot pa, parang gano'n.
Ano lang siguro, to answer it directly now, no, the non-tenured or whoever, pati yung mga nakasabbatical, I think don't worry about it because the law is very clear on it and the law is standing behind us. It's just that ang sasabihin lang ni UST is that we have finite resources and that we can only prioritize as much for now. Hindi naman po tayo papayag na as much lang pero hanggang doon na lang. Cannot be done. Okay. Yeah. I give you that assurance. Thank you.
Yeah, of course, we cannot, thank you, Sir Emmer. We cannot actually, just a last note on that, we cannot, of course, offer to inoculate the whole Philippines. But UST is a community. So, as a matter of fact nga, I was willing to include yung aming yaya be inoculated, pero nagpasign na pala sa sa LGU. So, anyway, yeah, so I'd maybe some people would like to comment on the on the work in progress paper.
Thank you, Pao.
Thank you, Doc Pao. We are also inviting others if you have questions regarding Sir Emmer's work in progress. You may click raise hand to be recognized. Baka nahiya po sila, sir.
Baka mamaya tatanungin bakuna eh. Okay lang. Kahit bakuna tanungin nyo, okay lang. Kahit dole, okay lang. I had to be on a meeting last night, 7:30 to 11:30 ng gabi. My first baptism of fire. The first ever board meeting ng USPO. And of course, I wish Robert Montaña was there with me, but has other plans. Yeah.
Maybe it seems that there are no question, sir?
Yeah. Okay.
Ay, may chat po
Okay.
from Sir Mark Joseph. Ending it. Is there no existential import?
Wow. Maybe let's ask Mark what he means by existential import here.
Sir MJ, you can unmute yourself. Thank you.
Wala lang, late kasi ako eh. Ano? Hindi, kasi pag wala lang, yung unang narinig mo, pag grievability, di ba, yung mga recognition, ganyan. Inaisip mo kagad yung other, ganon. And, ewan ko lang, parang, wala bang parang existentialism dyan na ano, nakasali.
Yeah, I think meron din, meron. Lalo na doon sa aspeto ng kay yung point, yung section later on Judith Butler. Actually, Mark, ano nga parang naisip ko na yung article that first should come up siguro from me will be on this one, the more existential aspect of it, but not necessarily ontological description. Ganun. So, making that distinction, I guess, this would be, parang ang opening ko work would start from the last, kumbaga. And I admit it will be more on the existentialist side rather than the ontological or the metaphysical one. Okay. Yeah. Siguro on May, I can give you a more detailed report on what is this existential element or flavor that is there.
If I may also comment on that, Sir Emer and Mark.
Yeah.
Regarding the existential import of the idea of grievability or mutual recognition. To my mind, anything philosophical is existential.
Okay.
But another way of saying that also,
I agree.
Another way of saying that is that kasi we think that ontology is a kind of to my mind, ontology and metaphysics are different.
Okay.
And it seems like we assume that ontology is how do I put this? Para bang when we talk about, for example, the philosophical or existential experience of suffering, that could be also described as a kind of ontology of suffering. And what I mean by that, like I said earlier, it depends on how we use the word ontology. And what I mean by that is that there are circumstances that make suffering possible. And so these circumstances are the ontological for lack of a better term, I will just use the word foundation, but there are the ontological reasons why suffering occurs.
Okay.
Because to my mind, ontology means possibility. What makes a revolution possible? What are the ontological circumstances that will bring forth a revolution or will bring forth change? What are the ontological circumstances that allow, for example, Auschwitz to happen? Ontological. So the word ontology, in that sense, then doesn't have to be this highly esteemed term tantamount to metaphysics. And kasi nga we have this loaded idea of metaphysics as if metaphysics is the science of all sciences, right? That's why instead of metaphysics, I use the word ontology.
Yes.
I understand the use of the word metaphysics. I understand how it is being used in most of our discussions, but uh, my bias really, or my preference is to use the word ontology. That's why we can talk about social ontology, and social ontology refers to precisely what I'm talking about: possibility of things.
Yeah.
And so, therefore, there's even an ontology of pandemics. What makes a pandemic possible, right?
Yeah.
What are, in other words, what are the circumstances? What are the circumstances that are in place that allow that allow something to happen? That to me is so. So when then? So when? Sorry, and I'd like to include this. When we start to talk about it philosophically,
Sorry,
right? That's when we do ontology. We are doing ontology. So in that sense, then, when we talk about the existential import of grievability, uh, it's existential because it's experiential, but we are also going to talk about it in philosophical or theoretical terms. So that's when we do ontology.
Yeah.
So when we try to describe, for example, mutual recognition, or in Judith Butler's context, when she tries to describe the reason why we have to respect other people, and when she says that we respect other people of because people are grievable, she is describing something that allows respect possible.
Yeah.
In that sense, then that's why I call she doesn't really refer to it as ontology in her book, but to my mind, the way she's describing it, she is doing some sort of ontology because she's describing something that makes something possible. It is describing a scenario, rather. She's describing a scenario or set of circumstances that are together, in dialectical interaction that make grievability possible, and of course, equal grievability possible. So yun, yung I think yung ontology, I think we should not refrain from using it, the word ontology.
Yes.
But for me, it has a specific use. Um, Yan last na lang, Mark, yung nabanggit mo dyan, sabi mo,
Freedom.
in existentialism, dyan, ginagamit natin freedom, angst, the other, so on and so forth. Masyado lang tayong mahilig na I don't know, parang naging style na lang yung existentialism, no?
Mm-hmm.
But anything philosophical is existential. And I don't even use the word existentialism in that stylistic in that stylistic context, no. It's not special to me, right? The word existentialism is not special to me. It just means that what we talk about in philosophy is about life, right? So in that sense, it's existential.
Just
It's
generic.
about existence. So yung in the tradition of existentialism naman, yung ideas of freedom, when we talk about Sartre, angst, when we talk about same person, Sartre or Heidegger, and so on. What they're doing is basically describing the I don't well, you could say social or political circumstances that surround the ideas of an experience of angst, or the experience of or non-experience of freedom, right?
Yeah.
So in that sense, they are doing ontology. So in that context, then ontology is not as I call this. I am running out of words. So parang it's not really a method. It's not it's not a research methodology, parang ganon, or a strict set of guidelines. Sige, anyway, Dr. Jovi is raising his hand. Maybe he has something to contribute to the discussion.
Thank you, Doc Pau. Sir Jovi, you are...
Thank you.
Salamat, Kim, for acknowledging me, and thank you, Sir Pau, for inputs. And thank you, Sir Emer, for the presentation. And I, like Sir Pau, I wish to congratulate you in public, no? Or probably commiserate with you, no? For
that's the right word.
for having been elected as the new USPO president. Anyway, sir, yung sa akin kanina, magtataas na sana ako ng kamay, kaya lang I received a call from trabaho ba?
Yeah.
Ano muna, kinuha ko muna yung tawag. Yung sa akin, sir, ano kasi in the early part of your presentation, and by the way, this is not the first that I've heard or I listened to your presentation, or at least the description of your project. Pero siguro ngayon, parang ang pagkakaiba, more or less, nagkakaroon na ng definite shape yung trajectory of the project.
Yeah, thank you.
Ang sa akin lang, I mean, hearing what you presented a while ago, iniisip ko lang, sir, baka you may not have any use for St. Thomas anymore.
Okay, thank you.
Unless ang trajectory po ng papel ay you want to repair certain theoretical inadequacy in St. Thomas' position or notion of the human person.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Kasi parang ganun ko siya nakikita na in fact the way I read sino nga ito, sa nalimutan ko ang pangalan, yung this Thomas that you were the way I read Maritan's participation in the crafting of Universal Declaration of Human Rights, parang siguro na-realize niya na there is certain inadequacy doon sa position ni Aquinas, that kaya he tried to supplement it with Kantian elements. At yun yung dahilan kung bakit a lot of people are looking at Maritain as a Kantian Thomist.
Okay.
Yung ganung kanyang posisyon. Kasi sir, theoretically, malaki talaga yung pagkakaiba ng argument that comes from the position of human nature and another argument that comes from the position of human right.
Correct.
Magka-clash yun at one point. Especially kung yun nga po, you will dig deeper into their origins, into their assumptions, and into their implications.
Yeah.
Kaya po, ang suggestion ko, para po mas mabigyan nyo ng siguro ng proper focus and definite structure yung papel, you may invoke St. Thomas siguro in the beginning para maipakita na while vital yung sinabi niya, it may not be adequate now to respond to the problems that we encounter locally and globally. So, something like that. Pero to extend the whole discourse throughout the dissertation and try to bridge Aquinas and Kant and Butler mahirap sir, especially na USPO president ka pa ngayon.
Thank you.
Yun
Thank
po.
you.
Yun lang sir.
Yeah. Thank you, Doc Jovi, for giving me the absolution, because maybe you are the first Thomas that I've heard who will not be advancing Thomas Aquinas all the time. You know naman, the other Thomists who are always advancing Thomas Aquinas almost all of the time. Okay, that's what I mean. Yeah, I think so. Kaya nga, naisip ko kanina, I will have to start from the end, going back. And parang ini-imagine ko nga is, yes, sinasabi nyo, Doc Joby na, you need not go back that far. Hanggang dito na lang, pwede na. And the same din naman yung sinabi ni Doc Pao na, it need not be a Catholic, it need not be a Christian philosopher naman talaga. Thank you very much, Doc Joby. And yes, yun din yun yung tatanungin ko sa iyo, Doc Joby, kung ano ang time span ko ba, or kung mahihila ba ako ng grabe dito sa kabila, do I get defaulted by not passing the requirements in the ano? But later, that's another chat with you siguro in private. Thank you, Doc Joby.
Thank you, sir.
Bye-bye.
Thank you po, Doc Joe.
Yeah.
Perhaps we can at least accept one more question, sir, if there is.
Actually, I plan to run away.
Please.
It's okay. I'm planning to run away already. Okay.
If that's the case, sir, I'll be passing the baton to Sir Airick for the moderatorship.
So sorry, I have to go, and thank you for the time. I have to prepare something for the Dolly meeting. Okay. Thank you again. Yeah.
All the best.
Thank you, dear friends of philosophy.
Thank you, Sir Emer.
Sir Airick.
Salamat, sir.
Once again, congratulations to Sir Emerito Gonzales for that successful presentation. And thank you, Sir Emer. Thank you so much. Hope to see you again soon.
Yeah, welcome, Airick.
Now, for the final part of our work in progress seminar for today, our final speaker is a product of a Mother of Good Counsel Seminary in Pampanga, and he will be talking about Schopenhauer's musical remarks on metaphysics of music and the historicity of his musical thought. Let us all welcome our final speaker for tonight, no other than Mr. Kim Jayson Villezca.
Thank you, Sir Prince Airick. Let me share my screen po. Hello po, nakikita po ba yung...
Yes, sir. Although it's not in full screen, probably it would help if you can put it on full screen.
What about this one?
I think this is better.
Okay.
Okay.
So my apologies po for if there will be occasional coughs during the reading of the paper, and I won't be turning on my camera as I'm not confident yet to reveal my face with the COVID. So this is part of my once again good evening to my professors and to fellow lovers of wisdom. This is the chapter 3 actually of my thesis. I entitled it The Second Movement on Schopenhauer's Musical Remarks on Metaphysics of Music and the Historicity of his Musical Thought. Now, it is generally accepted that the terms formalism and autonomy of art are indisputable in understanding the ongoing discourses on musical aesthetics and interpretation, in prescribing ways on how musicologists ought to see music itself. There is an imperative to always review the frameworks of our thoughts via historical underpinnings or genealogy of musical analysis. Our frameworks are part and parcel of the development of the shifting sands of thoughts and paradigms. Hence, It is important that we look at how we are influenced to seeing meanings and context by how we think about the value of music from the past. In the words of Matthew Pritchard, we want to know that similar modes of thought about similar types of value in similar works of music have maintained the degree of historical coherence up to the present moment. Thus, in this chapter, I will make an attempt to draw the following propositions. A. Music is the modulation of Schopenhauer's aesthetic theory. So I use the term modulation, to signify that Schopenhauer's musical remark on the world as will and representation, and as a corollary of this organic philosophy, is the best known conclusion of his aesthetic theory. Music for Schopenhauer is bound to be excluded in the systematic connection of his aesthetic theory, as it stands quite apart from all other arts. This is done through an exposition and textual analysis of musical remarks of Schopenhauer himself in his The World as Will and Representation. Secondly, I will be talking about the unrecognized shadows and historicity from which his theory gains foothold and influence. It is done through the historical method of analyzing the genealogy of musical aesthetic thought in the hope of understanding where Schopenhauer finds his audacity to glorify music in his aesthetic thought, thus allowing this project to find its ultimate cadence or conclusion, that of irony and silence are two intertwining the limiting elements of Schopenhauer musical aesthetic thought. Let me start with a metaphysics of music, music as the embodiment of the will. Schopenhauer's Metaphysics of Music appears in both volumes of his chief work, The World as Will and Representation. The elevation of music as the most comprehensive of all liberal arts is on the fact that music alone can imitate and transmit the nature of the will without the medium of the ideas, unlike the non-musical arts, which copy the ideas of things through certain media. For him, music bypasses the general understanding and role of art as copies of Platonic ideas. As I have discussed, I discussed this already in my previous uh, chapter. Schopenhauer characterized art in general as a modality in comprehending the Platonic ideas through the works of art of a genius. The works of a genius are portals in which the contemplation of Platonic ideas are made possible despite the innate categories of man under the principle of sufficient reason, making all forms of perception and understanding as mediated and individuated by the same principle. Music, therefore, is an exemption, as it is a direct expression of the will and it reveals the inner essence of the world. Music is the highest grade of the manifestation or objectivity of the will. That of music is independent of idea and of the world as idea, as it does not fall under the limitations of other arts, being mediated by a particular medium or representation. Hence, music bypasses all forms of impure phenomenal mediation. Schopenhauer has been explicit in discussing the imitative relation of music to the world. This imitative relation of music to the world is not an attempt at relegating music into something that copies or imitates the world. Rather, this imitative relation is an expression of the metaphysics of Schopenhauer that the movement of music is as good as the thing in itself. This imitative relation differs from the mimetic activity of all other arts. This is the very reason why Schopenhauer finds profound pleasure, a pleasure that does not concern any particular object, but a pleasure that pertains to what is true in the deepest recesses of our hearts. Music as the will that speaks its in itself to us. The universality and infallibility of music is found in its profound significance through its capacity to speak directly to us, unmediated, and is bereft of the imitative properties of all other arts in Schopenhauer's aesthetics. This becomes the philosophical argument for claiming that music is a universal language understood by all men, a universal fine art that transcends race, gender, history, and religion. Moreover, the imitative relation of music to the world in Schopenhauer's aesthetic thought deviates from the mimetic framework of Plato's idea of music. Despite being influenced by Plato, Schopenhauer provided a different account of the mimetic properties of arts. The ancient Greek philosophers, particularly Aristotle and Plato, have understood that music is image making and imitative, mimetic, so to speak. It is a mimesis of the conditions of the soul. In the Laws, Plato laid down the ethos of music by explaining that one has to be vigilant of what music offers us. Pleasure is not the criterion of music. The correctness of its imitation must be the basis of its significance and profundity in the lives of the people. I can only put forward a supposition that Plato's ethos of music is an artifact of his understanding of Pythagorean harmonics. This can be supported by Plato's insistence on the correctness of the imitative activity of music by placing calculative requisites in accepting a music to be correct, moral, and ethical. This is the reason why Plato needs to regulate music, as it requires a heavy toll on a layman to understand its essence before subscribing into it through singing in chorus and in other merrymaking activities. For Plato, understanding music's essence is to understand what it meant to represent and imitate in the first place. Plato therefore places three calculative requisites in order to understand the essence of music: knowledge of the original, of its correctness, and of the perfection of the representation. Without these requisites, given music's power and as condition of a soul, an error and a miscalculation on the use and understanding of music can cause serious moral damage arising from bad habits and way of living. On the other hand, Aristotle in his Politics discussed that music represents the character of the soul. Its rhythm, harmony, and melody are imitations of the soul. Thus, in hearing them, people are affected as if such movements of music directly speak their experiences without the need to enter into discursivity, for it offers us close feeling to the actual reality of what has been represented by music. The melodies of music thus are semblances of the true nature of pleasure, anger, hatred, nobility, temperance. Meanwhile, in Plato's Republic, there are musical modes, Dorian and Phrygian, that imitate the utterances of a brave man. Plato believes that there was a connection between modes of music and modes of feeling. Each mode is aimed to reach a certain melody by a unique movement of notes in each scale. In modern music, we can hear the difference of each chord by a certain movement of a note that may either brighten or darken the sound. The major chord is the bright sound, while the minor chord is the lull sound or the sad sound. It is interesting that Schopenhauer responded to this by deviating away from music as something that educates the soul in its longing for its cosmic origin. Plato heralded that education in music is the most sovereign as it has the capacity to steer and move the soul. On the other hand, Schopenhauer gave music a glorified metaphysical status by claiming that it is the will itself that speaks to us when we listen to music. Contra Plato, Schopenhauer rejects the notion that the function of music is to retune the chords of an individual, that is, to educate the individual. The soul, as a principle of individuality, is regarded by Schopenhauer as mere phenomenon that is also subject to the principle of sufficient reason. The stark difference of Schopenhauer on the role of music in Timaeus is that music does not condone the servitude of knowledge to the will. A suspension of such knowledge is a suspension of subjectivity and individuality. Therefore, music here is not to recalibrate the soul or the character of an individual. Rather, it functions as an absorption in perception. The subject is lost in the object. Moreover, Schopenhauer had an opposite view with the Phytagorian intervals found in the Timaeus. In the second volume of his chief work, he claimed that music is born out of the note that are clamoring incessantly against one another, obstrepunt sibi perpetuo. For Schopenhauer, music is an embodiment of tension, where notes are clamoring against one another, thus producing tension. In musical theory, when one plays a harmonic interval, the notes can be played seamlessly by maintaining the equal proportion or harmony or notes that can be played in a way that they do not maintain the interval and thus clash and compete. The notes played in a harmonic interval produces a very different sound and can create moods for the listener. The Pythagorean intervals are best illustrated with the consonant musical sounds. Most of these chords are pleasant to hear, for they use the perfect ratio on intervals. The sound of a consonant music is very stable, where there is no feeling of anxiety or tension that has to be resolved. So this is the figure 1. We call this the consonant harmonies, wherein when we play this in piano or in any other instrument, these harmonic intervals will produce what we call the consonant sound or the consonant harmonies, because they are perfectly using the perfect ratio and intervals according to Pythagorean harmonics. Dissonants are intervals that cause tension and desire and that are to be resolved to consonant intervals. I will be explaining here what do I mean by dissonance. This is just a technical, a little bit technical in terms of music. Dissonance is a sound. The sound that it produces is very sharp, unsettling, and unresolved as compared to the consonants. A very good example of a dissonance where it releases tension and discord and it needs to be resolved to a consonant interval is a suspension chord. So what is a suspension chord? So in music theory, so I'll be explaining here the diagram. In music theory, a suspension chord is basically composed of 3 critical parts. First is the preparation, P. Second is the suspension, the S. And third is the resolution, the R. More often than not, it is generally accepted that S, the suspension, is also the same note as P and only moves into R via single movement, either upward or downward. Thus, we can claim that a suspension chord is a protracted tone that belongs to a previous chord and seeks resolution and consonance by forcing the late arrival of a new chord tone. So this one, the first measure, shows the G chord followed by a C chord. These are the consonant harmonies as illustrated. But if we will be putting the G chord into G suspension, it becomes like this. and that it finds it consonance or resolution in the C chord by this. So with the chord C, E, and C, C, yes, C,
G.
G,
Also
and
G.
also G and C. That's a C chord. Now, the dissonance that will be created by the tension of the note will be resolved into what we call a new consonant chord, which can be heard as a more stable sound. So this is another example of that. The movement of a note in a suspension and in a dissonant pattern is not the image or likeness of a certain desire, but rather it is a universal truth how will moves and communicates in us. Schopenhauer says it is the connection, says it that the connection of the metaphysical significance of music with its physical and arithmetical basis rests on the fact that what resists our apprehension, namely the irrational relation or dissonance, becomes the natural image of what resists our will. And conversely, the consonance or the rational relation, by easily adapting itself to our apprehension, becomes the image of the satisfaction of the will. Moreover, the movements of notes as tension and force are a direct manifestation of the movement of the will as an endless striving. Now, the focal point of Schopenhauer's metaphysics of music is that it is by no means like other arts, namely a copy of the ideas, but a copy of the will itself, the objectivity of which are the ideas. And in the illustration above, one can see that music need not represent a certain representation in the realm of the phenomenal world, because music does not belong to the phenomenal world, but it can communicate in such a way that a person who listens can hear the essence of the world, and music can achieve this through the unmediated movement of tones. When one listens to music, it is as if the will is speaking to us. One thing that is remarkable with music is that it expresses the different forms of will's efforts, especially suffering that is inherent in the will's endless strivings, as well as brief satisfactions followed by more striving. As Schopenhauer suggests, the whole music is the melody to which the world is the text. The tones and melodies of music communicate to us in such a way that the deepest desires of the world and the servitude of the will is felt without even experiencing the actual pain, joy, and sorrow it delivers. I was notified already to wrap up the discussion. So basically, this part I am discussing how the melody, how the movement of the notes are actually a movement of the will. And in this part, just a glance, this is what actually I term this one as Schopenhauer's theory of harmonics because uh, he uh, he is actually very genius because he infused three intellectual musical thinkers and philosophers as well. He appropriated Pythagoras, uh, Jean-Philippe Rameau, a French musical theorist, and also I also found an Italianate in Schopenhauer's thought using Rossini. So this harmonics will only show us that how Schopenhauer used music through the method of analogy, of course, to say that this one to say that the music itself, music is the best way to explain uh, the will because of our uh, inadequacies in a way to conceptualize the will, because for Schopenhauer, he was doing this because of the reluctance of Immanuel Kant to actually identify the will. But Schopenhauer pushed this in such a way that he used the method of analogy to demonstrate such, without even falling and making will as another object of human inquiry, because that will violate its non what we call this, uh, because it is not subject to the principle of sufficient reason. So here I discuss, wrap up ko na lang po, Pythagoras, that the uh, the scales are representative of the matter, from the organic, inorganic to subjectivity, and together with Jean-Philippe Rameau, he also used this as a backdrop uh, to support his claim. And lastly, Rossini, here, for him, Rossini raised two important points, that is, the primacy of the melody over the lyrics and the non-representational role of music. And then, yun lang po, because because of time constraints, I won't be able to finish all this. And of course, after this, I will definitely touch the irony and silence of music as my nuanced interpretation of Schopenhauer's philosophy of music. Thank you, and I'm now opening the floor to questions, criticisms, and suggestions. Thank you po for bearing with me. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sir Kim, Jayson. Now that Sir Kim's talk has already concluded, if you have any queries, comments, or suggestions, just raise your hand, or probably you can just turn on your microphone for you to be acknowledged. I think there, Sir Mark Joseph is yeah,
Yes.
Sir Mark Joseph is raising his hand. Let's listen to Sir Mark.
Appreciate ko lang yung ginawa mo. Grabe, sobrang technical, ano. Siyempre, marami akong di naintindihan. Pero, siyempre, pag-usapan ko lang yung alam ko na
Yeah.
siguro hindi ko talaga pa rin naintindihan ng maayos. Yung kay Schopenhauer, 'di ba? Yung thing in itself niya, yun yung will mismo, 'di ba?
Yes, sir.
Para sa kanya, 'di ba? Parang yun yung kasi si Kant nga hindi daw natin ma-penetrate yung yung thing in
will.
itself. Kay Schopenhauer, parang yun no, yun na yung thing in itself.
Yes.
Yung tanong ko lang, towards the end ng iyong paper, kasi lalo na ngayon nagiging fashionable yung yung string theory, yung kina Michio Kaku, yung kina Green, 'di ba? Na of course yung pinaka substance ng mga bagay ay strings, no? And then siyempre parang bumabalik na naman tayo kay Pythagoras niyan, 'di ba? Na ang mga bagay ay music. May ganun ka bang parang may isasali mo ba or may direction bang ganon sa'yo?
Actually, sir, uh, I talked about Pythagoras doon sa chapter 3. To show lang that, for a while, to show lang that there is, Schopenhauer wanted to illustrate the evolution of being using music for a while. Meron naman po akong ano dito eh. Summary ko dito. What I ito. The Pythagorean theory of acoustics was adopted by Schopenhauer to demonstrate two things. One is that the interrelated of beings as an analogy of the evolution of being, that of from inanimate the most complex and perfect human subjectivity. Second, the parallelism of music as the embodiment of the will with the physical empirical in the world as representation. And I actually the paper will end not going back to Pythagoras, making all things as a matter of number or measurement, but rather my nuanced interpretation on Schopenhauer will focus on two things. One, music is irony, that it is actually, I call it the non-particularity of music. It pertains to nothing. It pertains, it doesn't pertain to any particular, but it is only pertaining on the universal, on the essences. Second, is the silence of music, which means that there can be no really end for the search for meaning in music, and that it is actually in consonance with the concept of Schopenhauer's will, wherein we can only in a way listen to it, talk to it, but we cannot definitively and exhaustively capture what it what is the will is actually all about, but it is only through our listening capacity, and that it has no end. I mean, the search for meaning for that would be no end, and that's why I call it silence, because the way it is silent, because it is bereft of what of the capacity to be in somehow understood, but silent because in as much as we want to fully explain it, in the end parang the best way to revere that which cannot be somehow known, something like is silence, something like. But hindi siya mauuwi doon sa string theory and going back to
Hindi, yung sa akin lang kasi parang kung hindi para sa akin ano ba yung deal kay Schopenhauer, parang as in yun na talaga yung kumbaga essence ng is it in any way just an analogy of what?
Yes, sir. Inamin naman
the thing itself, diba? Parang
inamin naman ni, in a rare admittance of humility, Schopenhauer admitted that we can only understand will through the through music, through what we call analogy. Kasi if it becomes another, yes sir, if it becomes another object of inquiry, that would make it under the principle of sufficient reason. Thank you, Sir MJ. I hope I satisfied your question.
Thank you, Kim. Grabe. Nosebleed.
Sorry.
Thank you.
Yes po.
Okay, thank you so much, Sir MJ, for that question. Now we have two hands here, Dr. Jovi and yeah, and Anton. But I think it was Sir Anton who raised his hand first. So yeah, let's listen to Sir Anton, and then after that we'll go to Dr. Jovi.
Okay, thank you, Airick. Thank you then, Kim, for that presentation. Uh, just something that I couldn't quite understand. Parang what is the problem that you're trying to address? Parang what's the point of writing this? Hindi ko lang, I mean, that's not yet a bit clear to me kasi looking at your title, parang it says here, yeah, remarks, tapos on metaphysics of music, and then the historicity of his musical thought. I'm just wondering what is parang the main problem or the main concern of this paper.
The main concern of this chapter is to actually explain the, although if we read the world as will and representation, Schopenhauer did provide few pages or explain the music in not extensively as he explained the problem of the will and the problem of the world as representation. But my focus on this chapter is that one is to expose what is the metaphysics of music according to Schopenhauer, and then secondly, how this metaphysics of music is actually influenced by three intellectuals. Yung hindi ko na-discuss kanina, si na Pythagoras, Jean-Philippe Rameau, and Rossini. Because
Okay.
I will use the chapter 3 as the bridge to my, hopefully, my contribution to the discourse that on the silence and irony of music.
So this is chapter 2, tama ba? Ang
Chapter 3.
3 na ito. Ano yung nasa chapter 2?
The chapter 2 is the general philosophy of Schopenhauer.
Okay.
And his,
hindi kasi yung nakuha ko lang it's just it's just maybe it's just me, pero it's I see it as a reprise. Especially you have notes and yeah, I mean it's very nice, pero it's something that, well, ako, if I just read the will and representation and some other notes, it's something I could already get. Kaya I was just wondering saan ito patungo. Kasi I don't find for a master's level a certain level of, for example, critique or a certain level of engagement with what other people are saying. Kasi yes, although I mean you are very right in saying, kasi the difference of the major from the minor chord, and then like this, and then we could give illustrations, pero it's something Schopenhauer really says. And maybe because it's his reaction to Kant's distinction between noumenon and phenomenon.
yes.
That's why Schopenhauer, right, he formulates the idea of the will, because we couldn't do that, which eventually Nietzsche also reacts to. So you have that connection in ethics. Pero I mean, talking about music and Schopenhauer and in such a presentation, maybe what I would just comment nga na I don't really find anything problematic with it, because it's exactly what Schopenhauer is saying. Maybe if we have a certain level of engagement with more secondary literature or a certain level of critique, I think it would be a better presentation. Para lang hindi, I mean, if you look at it this way, para hindi lamang sa chapter 4 yung contribution mo. Kahit sa chapter 3 or maybe even in chapter 2, there is already a contribution made. Kasi baka mamaya, if this is chapter 3, chapter 2 is simply reviewing key concepts. What is the principium individuationis? What is the world as a will to live? And yung mga ganon, I don't think that would be a nice direction for a thesis. Well, this is just my remarks. Yun nga, so I think yun lang hinahanap ko sana, yung critique So maganda yung topic. Mas parang nakulangan lang ako. It would be better if there were more substantive critiques.
Yeah, I actually reduced
Hmm.
because we agreed, my advisor and I agreed to follow muna the basic philosophical exposition as also commented by my reviewers. Actually, I'm trying yung if kung sanang given the chance to present yung kay Pythagoras, Rameau, and Rossini, these are actually they are not much discussed in WWR. Rather, what I did is to research on what guided Schopenhauer's musical thought, and I found that it was one, Pythagoras, and then second, Rameau, and thirdly, to my surprise, it was Rossini, because given the time, the 18th century, the German society is very much influenced by the French and the Austrian musical thinkers, and so I found it surprising to see Rossini in Schopenhauer's thought, because Rossini is Italian, and so that in musicology, in a way that is parang surprise din, given the influence of Rameau in during those days, and the influence of other uh, uh, musical thinkers and composers alike.
Okay, thank you, Kim. Ayun lang. Well, we all know naman na yung Italian opera had a very strong impact sa German culture. So, I mean, not that surprising for me. Pero that's a very nice thing. Sana yun yung, you were able to spend more time to present that this evening. Anyway, I'll stop there. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Anton, for that. Now, let's listen to Doc Jovi. I think Doc Jovi raised his hand earlier.
Salamat, Airick, and thank you, Kim, for your presentation.
Thank you
It
po, Doc.
appears that sabi mo this is a thesis material and it appears na it's almost done. Tama ba?
Yes po, Doc.
And who's advising you on this?
Si Doc Flor po. Siya po ang nag-substitute kay Brother Romy.
Pag sinabi natin almost done, ibig sabihin ito, hindi na lang nababind yung thesis mo. Pero good to go na.
Actually, ito na yung defense niya. Bukas na yung binding, bro.
Ano po, Doc? Chine-check pa po ni Doc Flor and fina-final po yung ibang bagay.
Very basic lang yung mga tanong ko, Kim, no? Just to help us understand where you are coming from and what do you propose to do, no? For example, una kong tanong ko, where is this interest on music coming from? What motivated you to work on this highly, sabihin natin, parang unbeaten path to especially sa FICO?
Doc, I am a musician myself po kasi.
You are a?
Musician po.
Musician.
I play the
singer, musical instrument player?
Yes po. I am a conductor po. A violinist and a pianist as well.
Okay. Do you have a degree on music?
I don't have po.
Pero you have a training on music?
Self-training lang po.
Okay. Tapos yung susunod kong tanong, tama bang isipin that your thesis is basically something like a history of ideas related to music?
On chapter 3 po, Doc, I would say that I touch the development of the musical idea based on Pythagoras, Rameau, and Rossini as as uh, as part of the limitation of the study. At dapat hello po, Doc Floor. Dapat po I would include other musical ano din po, but because I am limited of the ano rin po time din po, I won't be able to include other thinkers. And so what we did po is to focus on these three influential thinkers, kay Schopenhauer. Musical thinkers.
Okay. Yun yung tinatanong ko personally, no? Kasi nga, sabi mo nga yung thesis mo is almost done and you present to us chapter 3. Basically, parang ano to eh. Yung parang aswang, pinati yung katawan. Yung kalahati lang ng katawan. Hindi nga kalahati ng katawan, parang pusod lang yung nakikita namin ngayon.
Yes po.
Hindi namin nakita yung what came ahead and what will come after. So, medyo, there are a lot of things na, should we say, parang covered in gray, so to speak.
Yes po.
Yun lang. Mahirap i-assess yung work on aesthetics eh. Dahil, ano ba to? Kaya, as I was saying, is this a history of ideas? Kasi sinasabi mo kanina yung influences of Schopenhauer. Pero at the same time, you are presenting your actually you're presenting what was talked about by Schopenhauer himself. Kaya medyo uncomfortable si Anton kanina dahil what you are presenting is a point raised by Schopenhauer, pero nasaan ka doon? It's to, so to speak, no?
Yes po.
Tapos if it's on music, katulad kanina parang napakaro, you're presenting yung dissonance using, for example, illustrations ng musical notes. Pero wala example ng real music.
Yes po.
I suppose baka somewhere in your thesis biglang yun yung problema. Yun lang. I admire your attempt to para bang hindi ko masasabing defend din, to be a proponent of Schopenhauer's philosophy. At mukhang you are well-versed on what he wrote. Pero, as suggested by Anton a while ago, na since medyo challenging talaga yung philosopher na napili mo, your panelists might be expecting more. And even musically inclined rather individuals might also expect more from you.
Yes.
Ngayon, ang dating sa akin, yes, this is a work on aesthetics or philosophy of art. Pero ang dating sa akin ng chapter na ito, ng chapter 3, parang bang napaka-bookish pa rin, parang napaka-textual pa rin. Tapos wala pa rin doon yung, should I say, philosophic traction that should accompany any MA thesis. Sabi mo naman, your advisor is working in tandem with you to do this. So, sana before na maipasa mo to sa OGR, you might want to consider these points that we are trying to share with you for your own improvement and the improvement of your work.
Yes po, Doc. Thank you.
Okay. Salamat, Kim.
Thank you so much po, Doc. Well noted po ang suggestions.
Okay, probably we'll listen to Jesse first, and then after that, we will listen to Doc Pao. Sir Jesse, please.
Yeah, thank you, Airick, and congratulations, Kim. I find your presentation is quite for me unlike siguro yung mga sila Sir Jovi and Sir Anton. I find it promising actually. Not because we both work on Schopenhauer. Even I actually both work. I work on Schopenhauer prior working on what I'm actually writing now. Siguro I have only two comments. Of which the first one is already mentioned by Anton. We both agree that we find your presentation possessing vague, problematic siguro, because Anton was right to point out that what you're saying is basically what the same thing which what Schopenhauer said many decades ago, or yeah, centuries before. So hindi ko makita yung parang this is perhaps tackling on music. Hindi ko makita yung sarili mong boses kung tutusin in what you're writing. But perhaps ang pinaka-gist siguro nung sinusulat mo is dun sa chapter 4. I saw yung title and perhaps yung the first two sentences about silence. And it's actually good that you point out the same thing with Schopenhauer's observation. Basically, in general, in music in general, by analogy, you've been mentioning analogy a while ago. Makikita natin Schopenhauer is actually advocating antinatalism as an antidote to existence, and at the same time, you in your inquiries are advocating silence in your inquiries on music. So quite similar lang din yung yung daloy ng discussion. For existence, to cure existence, perhaps the point is not to exist at all. And the same thing with music. To create beautiful music siguro, the point is not to be silent at all. Yun yung first comment ko. You're basically saying the same thing with what Schopenhauer was actually said decades ago. And siguro yung isang comment ko pa, perhaps just why I said it's promising, because I see connections with what you are actually writing. They had a similar theoretical direction with what new materialists were writing about Schopenhauer in these contemporary times. We know that Schopenhauer's philosophy and even aesthetics were highly neglected during 19th century, even the first half of the 20th century. It was not until the late 20th century when new materialists such as siguro sila Jane Bennett and Donna Haraway perhaps, or even Thomas Nail kung tutuusin, tried to assess Schopenhauer from the perspective of materialism, and new materialism, of course, coming from Guattari. They tried, or at least these thinkers attempted to dissect elements from Schopenhauer's musical theory, such as, of course, elements which consists of nodes or intensities. You've mentioned dissonance and even vibration. Actually, these are concepts highly discussed in aesthetics from the perspective of new materialism. And I'd like to see how perhaps you could insert the contributions of the new materialist in pointing out what you want to say about Schopenhauer's musical theory. Because maraming literature about how Schopenhauer was actually basically the reception of Schopenhauer's musical theory in contemporary times. Lalo lang ngayon, I'd like to point out how, or perhaps yung yung tendency to look Schopenhauer not necessarily as a thinker, yung generic thinker natin as a grumpy old man na talagang pessimist, but actually Schopenhauer was
I agree.
for the first time upon reading the musical theory of Schopenhauer, nakita ng mga new materialists that there is a perhaps what Nietzsche would have portrayed as a Junetian aesthetic theorist. Yeah, or rather Junetian, mas Junetian. You could also mention works of Emile Cioran, for example. Emile Cioran's musings with Schopenhauer's theory. And even Eugene Thacker. Eugene Thacker was, well, reading Eugene Thacker, unfortunately, is like reading Schopenhauer on drugs. Yun lang. Maganda actually i-incorporate mo yung mga contemporary thinkers na nagsulat kay Schopenhauer, specifically dun sa kanyang musical theory. And of course, trying to appropriate how Schopenhauer's aesthetic or perhaps philosophy of value, he never really actually considered music as part of aesthetics or any of the arts. Sabi mo nga, philosophy of the value of music, the value of sound as the nearest metaphysical thing to man, sabi niya, in the world of will and representation. It's how we what I want to say is attempt to use these secondary sources, perhaps ang correct term sa kanila, to justify how can your view of Schopenhauer's aesthetics of music can be appropriated, or if not appropriated, siguro yung reception ni Schopenhauer in the aesthetics of music. So ayun lang.
Yes. Thank you, Sir Jesse. I'll take note of that. I agree that kaso ang ano lang kasi is I really limited mentioning thinkers so as not to, in a way, parang baka kasi lumabnaw, and that is also one of the comments of my reviewers, to focus muna kay Schopenhauer. Although I argue that Schopenhauer did influence many thinkers like Wagner, Thomas Mann, Schoenberg, and other, and some thinkers, they don't actually admit that they are in a way influenced by Schopenhauer, but when we look at their ideas, I think we can say that they are Schopenhauerian in a way. Thank you, Sir Jesse. I'll take note of those.
All right. Thank you, Sir Jesse, for our last comment for tonight. Let us listen to Dr. Paulo Bolaños.
Oh, hello. Thank you, Airick. I hope we still have time, no, for a few more comment. I mean, my comment and then the response of Kim. I think it's difficult to. I wanted to understand the context of your use of Schopenhauer. But since you presented the third chapter of your thesis, para bang I think this is the difficulty of the difficulty that Anton and perhaps Dr. Jovi were experiencing earlier. It's kasi parang it's the context of your thesis, or rather that chapter is taken out of the context of your thesis. So I'd like then to go back to the question that you raised, the basic question that you are raising in your thesis. And I think that if I'm not mistaken, but you can correct me, the title that that you gave us on the historicity of music. Um, I'd like to go back to the idea, to the point that you're trying to make, no? Or simple lang natin. What is it exactly that you're trying to first? What is it exactly that you're pointing out in that chapter that you presented? And then the next question is, what is it that you are trying to do in your thesis?
Okay po, Doc. For a while po. For the third chapter, Doc, as I have mentioned a while ago, my goal is uh, to show that music is actually the modulation of Schopenhauer's aesthetic theory. That is, I say that this is the best known conclusion of his aesthetic theory. So to find
So, in other words, when you say modulation, music is the very expression of his aesthetics, parang ganon.
yes po.
Okay.
And then secondly po is that his musical aesthetics and remarks are guided by the three thinkers that I mentioned, Pythagoras, Rameau, and Rossini. And this is I used these three thinkers to show that okay, these are the theoretical reasons why Schopenhauer glorified music in his aesthetic thought, and that the third chapter will actually be the stepping stone or the vantage point uh, in which the whole project will find its ultimate coda. That is my nuance, hopefully my nuance interpretation of his aesthetic thought, that is irony and silence as two intertwining delimiting elements of his musical aesthetic thought.
I think your project, kasi I don't think a presentation like a webinar like this would give justice to what you're doing in your project. No, I think it actually deserves some level of attention and reading. No,
Yes.
kaya mahirap eh. I mean, siguro ang nakikita lang namin ay yung mga musical staff mo kanina, yung mga
Yes.
notes, so on. But it was difficult to to see the connection between those abstract symbols and well, Schopenhauer on the one hand, and then your argument on the other hand. The connection that you're trying to make, because I think that is the point of Anton, no, and Jovi earlier. What is the philosophical connection that you're trying to make? Uh, your argument is that music, well, I don't know, that's the argument of Schopenhauer, right? That music is the very expression of his idea of beauty, for example, or his idea of aesthetics.
Yes.
But ang tiyatanong naman siguro nila Doc Jovi and Anton and si ano rin si Jesse, what is the philosophical connection that you're trying to make apart from already exposing what and repeating what Schopenhauer has already said. And that question might not be addressed by your thesis in its present form, but perhaps you could address the question now, at least in this forum you could address it. So ano yung um, uh, paano mo iko-connecta, no? Paano mo iko-connecta yung background mo sa music, yung kay Schopenhauer, his thoughts on music, uh, uh, how is it significant?
Yes po.
Why should we pay attention to Schopenhauer's views on music? What is the philosophical, or the philosophical is there, but what is the social, the political import of paying attention to to Schopenhauer's aesthetics?
Okay po, let me uh, bring you po to my abstract. One of the things po that I want to achieve in my paper is that I will come up with a proposal for a more nuanced position in interpreting Schopenhauer's philosophy of music by identifying the limits and gaps of his methodology, and how I how will I identify his otherness in the current debate in philosophy of music. Because in the current debate of philosophy of music, music is divided currently into two. The first is the musical formalist, and the second is musical referentialist. The musical formalist would say that there's no meaning in music. So we can only enjoy music the way uh, I mean, as it is. I mean, you cannot ascribe meaning to that. Therefore, when you talk about music, um, it's not even correct for other people, according to them, to ascribe meaning to this. To okay, this music, this symphony feels like
Okay.
something like that. But on the
I
other,
think so. So, in other words, you're describing the musical purist.
yes,
Okay, so is Schopenhauer a musical purist in your opinion, or
uh,
you're arguing otherwise?
I would suggest that Doc, that I would suggest that Schopenhauer can serve as a bridge to link the formalist and the referentialist theory, that there is no actual divide between the two. Rather, the musical formalists, they only say that music has no meaning because of the what they fell into thinking that there's no really way to understand the noumenon, for example. So therefore, if that is the case, then music must must have no meaning. But on the other hand, why people get moved? I mean, why people get carried away when they listen to music, and why people study the effects of music in psychology, for example. So Schopenhauer, I discuss in chapter 3, Schopenhauer's this theory that uh, because of the limitation of our mind to think of the will, and it can only be understood through analogy. That is why for I will push that Schopenhauer is actually the best bridge to actually link the formalist and the referentialist argument. And there is no actual I would say that the formalist argument saying that wala daw pong meaning ang music because they fail to understand what Schopenhauer meant when he said that we can only understand music in through the method of analogy. And in the referentialist, they fell naman po into extreme that uh, each music refers to a particular, and therefore, for example, my particular pain, my particular sorrow. That is why I am coming up with a position situating Schopenhauer's otherness in the contemporary discourse in philosophy of music. I would
Okay,
under
I seem to get your point.
Yes po.
Pero huwag mo gamitin yung otherness. Maybe Schopenhauer's I don't know, an alternative term, no? I think what you're saying is that uh, well, I get your point, pero yung why, yeah, yun nga yung question ko kanina, why should we pay attention to Schopenhauer, right? Specifically on his remarks on music. But I'm wondering whether you've encountered any writings of Theodore Adorno on music,
Yes po.
because it seems
Nominal.
like
Yes.
it seems like Adorno, to some extent, not that he's arguing the same, arguing like Schopenhauer, but he seems to be also emphasizing that the historical and at the same time the formal and historical content of music.
Yes po. I encountered po Adorno in his nominalist theory of music, but he focused on, if I'm not mistaken, on how we can interpret music from the basis of historical materialism, um, and how music serves as, in a way, uh, to understand and critique uh, society, the forms of music, the evolution of music. But
Yeah.
Schopenhauer did not actually touch that because of he's trying to be uh, consistent with this claim in.
I'm just going to tease you. Don't you think that between Schopenhauer and Fyodor Adorno, that Schopenhauer is more purist than Adorno?
uh, I would say it would be unfair for Adorno to, because I haven't read him that much. So I would still say, Doc, that Schopenhauer is more of a, although Adorno did really study music. Nag-aral po siya ng music. Uh, but Schopenhauer, because of his activities during that time, he read, he was sent to school. At the same time, he met these composers, these brilliant composers, and I think I would still agree with Schopenhauer with his observations.
I think yun yung gustong marinig, no, o mabasa ng mga tao. Yung philosophical specificity nung and connection na gusto mong gawin sa iyong project. So I'll stop there.
Yes.
Pero sabi ni Mark, mas purist daw si Adorno because Adorno hates jazz. Well, that's a different conversation altogether, Mark.
Yes. But I would suggest, I would like to believe that Schopenhauer is more purist because he actually advocated absolute music, wherein for him music with words is actually an abomination.
Siyempre, hindi naman nabuhay si Schopenhauer sa panahon ng jazz.
Yeah, because jazz is another form of yes, no jazz during that time.
Well, I think there's a historical context of that, but it will take time to discuss it.
Yes.
Jazz
Yes.
in the time of Adorno was simply pop music. No, it's not the same jazz as we know today.
Yes po.
Siguro if we're going to situate Adorno in our situation, in our own milieu, he would be criticizing American Idol, yung mga ganyan.
Yes po.
Yan yung
Yeah.
so anyway, so it's the commercial, I think the commercial aspect of music that Adorno was critical of.
I agree, Doc.
All right, I think that concludes the open forum for our for Sir Kim Jayson's presentation. Now I will be turning it over to Anton for the final words for this week. Thank you so much.
My final words po pala. Thank you po everybody for being here and we'll see each other po next WP. By the way po, para po sa mga nag-sign up for our Noche session, it would be on the 10th of April, Saturday after Holy Week. So see you all po soon and have a blessed Holy Week.
Thank you so much everyone. Thank you po.